Okay, so you might just have to confirm if you're on Zoom, got it, and you're willing to be recorded. And hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about, on Shabbat, we're going to talk about the sort of like, what is the course of a regular Shabbat? From the minute Shabbat starts until the minute Shabbat ends, how does it look? Okay, because we talked about in previous sessions about the origins of Shabbat, Shabbat in the Bible, Shabbat in the sources that are around the time of the Bible, and now it's time to go into more practical stuff and seeing, what does it mean to conduct, like a proper Shabbat. What I'm saying is, very much, from an observant point of view, someone who is very particular to observe, the different details of the Shabbat. I have to say, personally, I try to do it as much as possible, and I don't know if I'll ever get a grade. I know I won't get a perfect grade, but I try as much as I can with some compromises and some adjustments, which I will talk about as well. The first, what happened to the title? Preparing for Shabbat. Okay, so preparing for Shabbat is a big part of Shabbat. We're sometimes under the assumption, Shabbat starts at sundown on Friday. So, what's to prepare? Light the candles and start Shabbat. But that's not the way it goes with Shabbat. Why can't that just happen?
Well, there's gotta be food. Somebody has to prepare it.
Right, and you're not supposed to prepare it on Shabbat, okay? Because there are different prohibitions that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. You're not allowed to start a fire on Shabbat, like we saw in our biblical sources. You're not supposed to do commerce, right? We talked about the different prophets that went against the people of Israel because they did commerce on Shabbat. So all these things that you can't do on Shabbat make you prepare in advance for Shabbat. And then there are a lot of questions of, okay, what happens if I start doing something before Shabbat, but it sort of like goes into Shabbat in terms of the preparation? And the Mishnah, the Talmud, has a whole lots of passages that talk exactly about that point, something that I started before Shabbat, which is okay, and it just continues going like automatically into Shabbat. Is that permissible? So it's determined that if it is not related to Shabbat, for one of the examples that they give is like dyeing your clothes. Okay, so if you put like your clothes like in a barrel of paint, okay, so it observes the the paint or whatever. I don't know how they did it in ancient times, and it goes and it happens throughout the Shabbat. That's not permissible. You need to start that long. You can only start that on I think the Mishnah says like on a Tuesday, Wednesday, so it ends before Shabbat. But anything that has to do with food preparation, you are allowed to do. So, for example, if I put like a crock pot full of meat and beans, and like for the traditional cholent, what the cholent is. There's a special slide about that. You'll get to see a picture soon, okay? But it's like this traditional food. So if you put it even raw before Shabbat, okay, you can then eat it on Shabbat, because although it's being prepared on Shabbat, not by you, it's by the fire where you put it inside or under or in the oven or whatever it is. But these are things you can do before Shabbat, even though they happen on Shabbat. So that's one reason to prepare for Shabbat, because there are things you cannot do on Shabbat. The second reason is more like a spiritual reason, meaning, what are you focusing your life on? Are you focusing your life on the 6 days of the week? work, achieving things, etc.? Or are you focusing your life on the concept of Shabbat, which is enjoying the fruit of your work, enjoying rest time, acknowledging that you're human and you need rest, and also you sort of like you put Shabbat in the center of your being, which means you aspire for that world to come of rest and being together with the family, and these are sort of like the values that you reflect on. So there's also a big argument in the Talmud about that, how soon in advance you have to prepare for Shabbat. I'll just conclude, okay? Hillel says you need to prepare for Shabbat, on Friday, okay? Because Shabbat's coming, so you need to prepare. He's very practical. Shammai says you have to start preparing for Shabbat on Sunday, okay? You have to start, like, if you see like a nice piece of fruit or a nice, piece of fish or meat in the market, you buy it as soon as you say this is for Shabbat. Like you don't eat it like during the week. You're like saving it, and I'm talking especially times when people were poor and didn't have a lot of of these things. So like I designate this for Shabbat. That's what Shammai says. Hillel says, no, you have to live in more. You have to enjoy the weekdays as well. You have to enjoy life as well. So if you find something, you enjoy it now, and on Friday you start preparing for Shabbat. So these are two different philosophical approaches on preparing for Shabbat. Yes, Peter, you wanted to ask something?
I look on Shabbat as being one of the most basic, meaningful testaments to being a Jew.
Okay, nice. I like that very much, and I agree. The Shabbat is sort of like the invention of the Bible, the Jewish people for the world. That's sort of like our invention, that rest day. That you have to stop and rest, yeah. So what are the different categories of preparing for Shabbat? So I wrote them down here. They're not necessarily in the right order, but for example, Shabbat clothes. Making sure you have nice clothes for Shabbat is something that the Talmud actually says. You have to make sure you're dressed up nicely. So if you're during the week, you dress like a shloch, okay? Right? That's the right word in Yiddish. I got it right? A shloch.
No, I've
Okay.
never heard that word before.
A slumper, yeah, slumper, yeah. A slump, okay? So on Shabbat, okay, you need to wear nice clothes, but you need to iron your shirt before Shabbat. You need to maybe go and buy a nice dress for Shabbat. Not every Shabbat, but once in a while. Take a shower. Okay, you have to take a shower before Shabbat. No, seriously, that's one of the obligations. Yeah, you could go to the mikveh to do that as well. To sort of like it's a custom. You don't have to, but it's sort of like something that gets you ready for Shabbat. So a lot of men actually go to the mikveh before Shabbat, and also women that their period is over, and this is sort of like the time where they could be with their husbands on Shabbat, so they go to the mikveh right before Shabbat begins, so that so they could perform that mitzvah as well. Another part is cleaning your home, and everyone is supposed to clean the home, not just traditionally the women that were the housewives and took care of that. So it was expected of them, but there are stories of rabbis that took the broom and also cleaned the house. I don't know if they cleaned the whole house. They might have just taken the broom and symbolically do something. But no, I'm joking. They cleaned the house and they participated in that as well. Cooking, of course, as we said, and cooking like good, fine dishes. That's a very important part. Setting up the Shabbat clocks. Okay, so we were talking about things that you can't do on Shabbat. So like if you want to turn on the oven, for example, So you would set up the oven, or like the Shabbat plate, like the blech, that you put the food on. So you would set that with a special clock that will make sure that it turns on at the times you need your food warmed up. Or if you don't use the lights on Shabbat, so you would set up like the clocks, the timers, Shabbat timers. Okay, you're familiar with those? Okay, but that I was surprised. I thought, like, when I got here, I didn't know if I would be able to find them, but then I saw they had them in I don't know, I think Home Depot or something like that. Yeah.
And there are office buildings and hotels that have Shabbos elevators. For Shabbos, they go to every floor, nobody has to touch a button.
Right. That's an amazing phenomenon as well of the modern technology. I used to live in a building like that in Jerusalem. There were two elevators. One was for the secular, tenants. They were Jewish, but they didn't want to bother, because the problem with this Shabbat elevator is it goes down a floor and it waits. So everyone comes in, and if no one's there, you're just like waiting with it. And during I lived on the 7th floor, and during COVID, I would join the minyan, the sort of like improvised synagogue that was down the street on my street level. But I would go down in the elevator. I would have like a plastic chair. I would sit down in the elevator, and it would take 5 minutes. So I would start my prayers already in the elevator. So I would, because I never came on time, because I wasn't the rabbi, so I didn't have to come on time. Why?
Could you carry your chair on Shabbat?
Yeah, well, it was like it was within the compound. It was in Jerusalem, where they have the Eruv. Another thing, actually, I didn't write it here, but you're right, is checking the Eruv, checking that the entire neighborhood is surrounded by this cord that makes it like one compound, that you could carry things from one place to the other. So a lot of cities in Israel have that cord, so someone goes on Friday and makes sure it's not.
There are areas in Los Angeles.
There are areas in Los Angeles. There are areas, I think, in London, in New York, for sure, and that allow people to carry things as well. Yes.
So it was literally a cord, not just that you knew what the area was, but there was a physical cord.
Yes.
There's a
that went
physical
around.
cord, and it's like on special poles that hold it. Yeah. Let me show you. Yeah. Let me show you a picture of an Eruv, actually. Okay.
Oh, okay, so it's up fairly high.
Oh,
It's not at
why is
street
it
level.
blocking this?
Like a power
This is
line.
not confidential. Okay. Okay, this is like a city in Israel, and it's telling you this is where the Eruv ends. Okay, so you don't go past here. Okay, so it's different. Oh, and here you see the cord in a much better way, and it's marked with these ribbons, so people could see that as well. Okay, so then
I'm
yes,
sorry. Is it up all the time?
it's
Or
up all
just
the
for
time.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's not easy to take it up and down, and it's up all the time. You just have to check it before Shabbat. Okay, baking challah. Okay, which is obviously the traditional things. Again, you don't do it on Shabbat. You do it before Shabbat. Setting up the Shabbat table, that it's nice and ready. So when you come back from the synagogue, it's all ready. And et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of chores, and you give it up, to the children to do, and the men and the women of the house. But there is that Israeli joke, okay, that especially like in Orthodox families, this is the preparation for Shabbat. And Ima, okay, you know what Ima is? Okay, mother and Abba. Okay, so you see what Ima is doing is cooking and frying and baking, making the salads and preparing the table, and fixing the home and cleaning the dust and brooming and doing the floor and laundry and hanging the laundry and folding the laundry and changing the sheets and ironing and making sure the kids are bathed. And what does Abba do? He prepares the Shabbat clocks, okay, because that's like the tiny, like those things. So that's like the Israeli joke. But people really, why? I did a lot more than that, but it is, it is a family effort. And the joke is also, I wanted to show you like this thing, like it's like the stress before Shabbat is also sort of like a tension that you always deal with. I mean, I deal with it until today because you have to start Shabbat at a certain time. So you have a lot of preparations you need to do up until a certain point. And it's very stressful. And that's a little bit opposite to the whole concept of Shabbat. It's like a day of rest. It's a day of, of fun, but you get so exhausted to it. So how do you, work that tension? So the Jewish invention is you just start preparing on Thursday and you don't sleep all night on Thursday. So you have a little bit more time.
But it's kind of a good thing because it highlights the transition.
It highlights a transition, and the minute you light the candles, like everything calms down.
It's a good thing.
And I have like friends that they were like crazy preparing for Shabbat, and the minute they light the candles, they sit down for a cup of coffee and a cake, and they just like relax and accept the Shabbat in that way. Setting up the Shabbat table is also very important. We'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about the Shabbat dinner. But having that festive feeling that Shabbat is ready is very important. Okay, where's our next slide? Okay, so our next slide is when does Shabbat start? Okay, so Shabbat starts at sunset, because that's when the Jewish day begins. The Jewish day begins, it says in the Bible, Vayi Erev, Vayi Boker, Yom Echad, it's when the world was created, it is evening and it is morning, and that's day one. So we learn from that the Jewish day starts in the evening. It doesn't start like at midnight. Like in our, in the, I don't know when did it start going on midnight?
It's pretty arbitrary.
It's arbitrary, right? When the clock was invented, I know.
You might think sunrise, but
you're right. You would think sunrise, yeah. But that's also interesting. When did the midnight start? But it's sunset. Now you could argue though that sunset is also not. There's still daylight, right? So when it's only after, how's it called? It's called the
twilight.
Twilight, when when it's completely dark. Okay, you could argue that that's when it starts. Okay, so actually, you're right. The day